Hello, everybody. Should we get this party started? If you're joining us live on YouTube, you may be delighted to notice we finally figured out how to get our camera working. Hello. We've missed you these past 3 months. And if you want to go to the next slide. Yeah. Awesome. So, welcome in for our game dev meeting today. Pretty familiar agenda if you're a regular attendee. If not, let's run you through it. We'll start with our intro here, which is this. We'll go through some announcements as well as some potential community plugs if people have things to share. And then we will jump right into tonight's presentation, which will be from wonderful community familiar faces for some, new faces for others, Erick and Sati. And then afterwards, we'll mingle, chit-chat, linger as long as we can, and then eventually head off to, this time it's going to be Perkins by special guest request, not Applebee's this time, for some drinks and further conversation. So welcome. I've already welcomed y'all in, but if you're new or if you're a regular, we hope you guys feel very welcome and invited here. We aim to provide a space for the enrichment and education of people in or adjacent to game development. If you are interested in reading our safe event policy, feel free to check it out at igdatc.org/policies. And I think I should be able to click it now. Awesome. If you didn't know, IGDA Twin Cities is an all-volunteer board. We are all donating our time to try and keep this community enthusiastic, energetic, running to the best of our abilities. So if you have any questions, concerns, or problems, talk to one of these people that you see in the images here. You can also reach out to us at igdatwincities@gmail.com, and we can all be found on Discord. We all have the IGDATC board role that you can just @ if you're interested in getting the attention of the whole board all at once. And if you are interested in serving on the board at all, we have elections coming up in March, which we'll get into more in the new year. We've also got volunteers who also fill in the gaps between all of our other wonderful board members. They do wonderful, exciting things like running our special interest groups, supporting other events, etc. If you're interested in doing something for our organization, if you have like a vision for something that you think would enrich the community and you want to see it happen, we would love to help empower you to make that happen. So if you're interested, feel free to reach out to us. So if you're new, we've got regular events. Most of our events are on Wednesdays. It's pretty consistent, 6:30 to 9:30 p.m. Central Standard Time. Our first Wednesday of the month is our Devs Play Games meetup, where we invite game developers to socialize, play board games, get to know each other in your community. Right here, right now, it's our Game Dev meeting, right here at Nerdery. Our Devs Play Games is also at Nerdery. Next week will be our Twin Cities playtest, which will be at Noble Robot, a space for inviting local developers to share and playtest in development games. And if you're a guest, you get to play those games. And then our fourth Wednesday of every month is the MN, VR, and HCI meetup. It's a special interest group held at REM5, focused on VR, AR, and HCI presentations/demos. And all of our latter 3 events in that list that you see there with the little live icon means that they're being live streamed at youtube.com/IGDATC. So if you're looking at me through the camera, you made it. Thank you very much for showing up. We also have a couple different special interest groups, primarily our Women in Games gathering, which is held every 3rd Saturday of the month from 6:30 to 8:30 p.m., also held at Noble Robot. This is just a no-agenda, general networking, socializing event. There's often snacks and beverages and just great conversation. So if you're interested in this and you in any way identify with the label of woman, then you're more than welcome. And currently on hiatus, but we're workshopping this currently, so keep tabs. But we usually have a People of Color get-together that we're currently trying to get up and running again. But more info on all of these events in more detail can be found on our Discord server in the events-info channel. We also have dedicated channels for each of those events. If you have any like follow-up discussions, thoughts that you didn't get to share, or things that you forgot you wanted to catch up with someone about, feel free to keep the conversation going after we leave the space. Mark, do you want to plug Twin Cities Playtest, or do you want me to just talk through it? I could bring a little bit more energy for this slide. Hey guys, I'm going to just keep full eye contact with the camera because I know we get some remote developers in here sometimes. If you've got a game in any state, if it's something that's just a mechanics playtest, if it's a visual demo that's just this is what we hope this game can achieve, anything from that to a finished released game, which is going to be the majority of all game projects, you should bring your game to the Twin Cities Playtest event. It's a space where people can share games that they're working on and get local developers and just interested people in the community to come and play test those games. We want your games. There is no excuse to not be showing a game at the Twin Cities Playtest. Come and get live feedback from individuals as well. If you get a set slot, then you'll have a dedicated section of the night where you'll have someone interviewing the people playing your game so you can get even more interactive live feedback. There are literally zero downsides to not doing this. Yeah, I think that covers it. Yes, DM Mark at Mark LaCroix on Discord. Bother him about it, and he'll get your game in the slides. Even if you don't, and you're like, oh man, I've got this cool game that I want to bring, like last minute, day of, we allow that. You'll just have to kind of elbow people out of the way for space, but we more than welcome no call, like immediate, like day of show ups. So yeah, bring your games, guys. My pleasure. Trenton, could you hit the next slide button? I don't know what's up. Oh, there we go. And if you're interested in getting connected with the community even more, we've got a couple different channels on our server where you can share more in detail about your project. We've got our games and projects section of the Discord with a bunch of different channels for local games and projects created and maintained by that individual developer. I will say, if you're not in on this right now, we are currently in the works of updating this to be a little bit more concise using Discord's new forums format. Changes pending on that, but if you're interested in sharing your projects with the rest of the community, this is a wonderful avenue to do so. You can also link discussions that are held in a channel or a server that you already have running, and you can moderate this channel like basically as you see fit. Use it for devlogs, for getting feedback from people, et cetera, et cetera. And we also have, as mentioned earlier, a channel for each of our events to keep the discussion going even after the event has ended and we've all gone home. And if you want to support IGDATC in other ways, we've got merch. That's right, gang. High quality t-shirts and more with all different types of logo and color and style combinations. Do we have anybody in the crowd who's got, yep, okay, IGDATC shirt. Thank you for representing. Support the community. Hoorah. And if you're interested, we have a new option if you're interested in donating your game's art. If you're interested in sharing a piece of art, a logo, a title, a flashy piece for a shirt that you're interested in donating to the community to get some more visibility for your game as well, feel free to do so. This will support your community while also bringing more attention to your game. If you're interested, reach out to us, send us your logo/graphics, and your merch will be listed alongside IGDA Twin Cities. And now, very brief aside, thank you very much to our sponsors, our venue hosts, our wonderful, wonderful people who keep these events happening. Primarily, we'd like to thank Nerdery and Troy, who keeps the lights on in here, keeps us all conglomerating here in this wonderful space, chit-chatting with each other. If you're interested in digital consultancy or software development co-working spaces, check out Nerdery. They might be a space you'd be interested in. And we've got some other general announcements. Just kidding, we're on to the community plugs. We'll leave it open at the beginning here if anybody has anything they'd like to share. This can be anything from a game release, development news, an event or meetup in the community that you'd like to share that you think would be beneficial to the people here, or anything else in between. give it. Yep. Step right up. Yeah. And if you want, you can stand in front of the
If you have something, just head to the front of the room just so we have you on deck.
All right, so have you ever wanted to go to GDC, but you couldn't quite fork the costs? Well, MDev is significantly cheaper, and it also happens to be in Madison, Wisconsin, and serves a similar function to GDC, where you get to go and see other game developers and hear talks by game developers and game developer adjuncts. So in November, if you've got time on your calendar, go ahead and sign up and show up.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ryan. I feel like every time I come to this meeting, I have to plug something. But today, a game that I worked on some has been released. So it's called Dance Champion. I joke, I did a very small amount of the 3D art in this. All the good stuff and one bad thing. Well, hopefully that'll be it's just an alpha. It's been released. It's called Dance Champion. It's like a Terraria sort of game. I found it. I just got to play it now that it got released. I found it pretty fun. So if you could go at least wish list it, that'd be great. Thanks.
Anybody else got anything fun and exciting to plug? Going once, going twice. Yeah. We'll jump in. So I've got something to plug. This is a game that was released partially in development. This was worked on by one of my friends who's also a programmer on a game that I'm currently working on. Check out Time Turned. It was released a couple months ago, but just wanted to bring a little bit more attention to it. Yeah, let's go with this. Yeah. Check it out. Yeah, so this is fully available, released on Steam right now. Time Turned, as you can see, released July 31st. So if you're interested in time games, puzzle games, any and all of the above, check it out. Woo! Ah, there we are. Yes. Alrighty. And now we've got some pre-sent in slides. Mark, do you want me to read off the? All right, I will read it myself. If you aren't familiar, Nice Games Club is a very awesome and exciting game development-focused podcast where professional Minnesota game devs Ellen, Stephen, and Mark discuss topics, conduct guest interviews, do one-hour game jams, and more. There's a new episode every week, which can be found at nicegames.club. Recent episodes include a roundtable with Scoring 101, The Game Dev Brain, an interview on optimization with Jared Huntley, another roundtable on audio middleware, psychic distance, and a special on player personas. How'd I do? Yeah, my pleasure. Woo! All right. And we've got another exciting plug.
Well, thanks for letting me speak here. I'll get in front of the camera for the online people. But for those of you that don't know me, I'm Troy. I work at the Nerdery here. I've worked here for 13 years. I've also participated in Extra Life for 13 years. Excuse me if I get a little emotional, because this charity is kind of close to my heart. We raise money for kids, specifically see them in hospitals, Gillette here in the Twin Cities. What we're doing is trying to recruit people. If you want to participate, you can come here November 2nd and raise money, see what's going on, meet some of the families, meet Gillette, some of the staff, some of the researchers that help figure out how to make these kids' lives better. And you get to see what some of our money goes to. We're trying to bring their research team with the VR in to show how they're leveraging VR to mitigate pain and go through, basically they use it sometimes for kids to put it on before they go to surgery, and then when they come out of surgery they have it back on, and they have to use less anesthesia, less pain medicine. They actually can start therapy right away, like the day after surgery with it, all sorts of stuff. So if you don't want to participate, we would appreciate anybody that's willing to donate to us. We are $32,000 away from raising $500,000. So, but we'll be here from 8 a.m. Saturday, November 2nd, through 8 a.m. Sunday, November 3rd. So we do have an open house for families if you just want to come and hang out and just see what we're about and maybe participate next year from 9 a.m. to 1 a.m. or 1 p.m. We'll have Dungeons and Dragons downstairs playing with Bad Wolf, and Dungeons and Dragons and drinks will be downstairs. Well, there'll be gaming up here. We'll have retro gaming along the wall. So yeah, I mean, you're all welcome. If you have a game you want to bring and share and play with people, board or video, more than welcome. I can make space for you. So I have all of this space in the whole downstairs to set up. So if you want to, you're more than welcome to. So, all right, thank you.
Thank you. Oh, there we are. All right, pass the mic again.
All right, now for something way less important than that. So raise your hand if you know what a mega game is. Ooh, okay, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. A mega game, just in case you don't know, is kind of a cross between a board game and a role-playing game that you play with like 40 to 100 people in the same room. It's one of my favorite things in the whole world. And there is one that is coming up in November. I am helping with. It's not my game or anything, but I'm helping with it. And if you're interested, like, check it out. There's a shut up and sit down video that like tells you all about Watch the Skies in particular that you should watch, but you can always ask me questions and stuff. These are very, very rare for Minnesota. The last one I think was definitely pre-COVID, so it's been a while. And yeah, I hope you'll check it out if it sounds at all interesting.
Alrighty, and now then, without further ado, let's welcome up our presenters of the night, Erick and Sami.
Thank you. That's the clicker. Do we have another mic to set? How about you take this turn? I can see it from here.
Just make sure that's up and running, and then
Test 1, 2.
make sure when you're talking, keep the mic.
How's everyone doing tonight? Cool. We are giving a presentation on the Astral Gunners Post-mortem, Early Access's Hard Mode, presented by us, Sati Bros. Who are we? Sati Bros are Sami, me, and
Erick, Sati.
so I'm a musician and a programmer.
And I'm a graphic artist and videographer.
And this is something we've been working on for quite a while, little over 10 years almost. It's something that I think it was 2 a.m. or something driving through Taco Bell. We were just talking, deciding like, hey, we actually have the perfect two-man team. Whoa, the lights turned off. We have the perfect two-man team to make a video game. We've got music and programming from me and art and visuals from my brother. So we decided why not just act on that and do something with it. So how did we start outside of that? It's something we've kind of been doing for a long time in our lives. We did a lot of creative stuff together as kids. We drew comics together. played with a lot of level designer tools and games. Around middle school, I started messing around with Game Maker, which at the time, that was just like a hobbyist tool. I don't think anyone was releasing professional games with that, but now it's a much different story. I made some classics such as John Petrucci's Adventure, where you played as the guitarist John Petrucci, shooting lasers out of your guitar, defeating all the poser guitarists who can't sweep pick. There was Arcade Tycoon 3. 1 and 2 didn't exist. The thought process was, if I just start with 3, it'll sell better, so people will think it's a successful franchise.
And speaking of level designer games, has anyone heard of this? Has anyone heard of Speedy Egbert? Nobody? One head nod back there. This guy's played Speedy Egbert.
That's more than I thought.
Well, if you're not familiar, here's a screenshot, and it looks very familiar to Mario Maker, and I think it was ahead of its time, and me and my brother would always go back and forth trying to one-up each other, make a harder level, and I remember I thought I got him stumped with a hidden entrance in a level, but he figured it out right away. So we've always been doing this.
You never had me stumped.
Never.
So why care what we say? I mean, honestly, you're here and you probably looked online and saw that we were talking, so that works. Aside from that, we've gone through the process of self-publishing a game. That was something really important to us on this project, and we did eventually release it that way. If you're someone who's thinking of self-publishing a game, you might not want to do it after listening to us, but we'll have important insight on that. Between the two of us, we've got 20 plus combined years of experience in just creative work in general, not all game development focused. And throughout the process of making Astral Gunners, we learned everything the hard way. There were a few things that we learned the easy way by showing up to IGDA. Everything else, learned it the hard way from experience. And speaking of, we do think this is a really important function, so when we were asked to show up, we want to see more good games, so anything we can share as knowledge is something we want to help with so more good games can exist. For what it's worth, not the biggest selling game ever, but we do currently have 100% positive reviews on Steam. We're not going to teach you how to make a mega hit, but we do believe that we've made a game that our niche resonated with to a certain degree. Hopefully, time will give us a little bit more success, but the game is out now. It's finished. We're moving on. So what is Astral Gunners? That is, yes, thank you. We're going to throw some shmup terms at you. Astral Gunners is a horizontal, shortened to hori, shoot 'em up, shortened to shmup. Gameplay has a heavy emphasis on character variety, scoring gameplay. We've got some progression elements in there that if you're not a lot of people I've learned over the years don't really like the gameplay structure of a shoot 'em up where you're playing the same thing over and over and over and trying to master it. So we added some unlockables to kind of give a little bit more of a roguelite progression experience to players who want more of that. But yeah, it's a really fast, frenetic, and energetic game, so probably the best way to show that is just showing you our trailer real quick here. So just so you get an idea of what we're talking about and what our game looks like, we'll just run this real quick. Thank you. Yeah, so that's Astral Gunners. That's the game we're talking
You
about.
just beat Hollow Knight. Congratulations.
We didn't make Hollow
But
Knight.
the ending, you would change.
All right, so a quick rundown of the history of our development. It did take us, like we said, a little over 10 years, but there was some periods of on and off with that. 2012 was when we started out trying to make a serious game, showed the game to a few friends who weren't really aspiring developers, but were humoring us a lot. Our big inspiration, I think, a lot of people might relate to this, the indie era of the Xbox Live Arcade. That was one of the big things that made us realize, like, okay, we could do this. 2014, we found out about IGDA and started coming here. And some old heads might recognize us from here. We haven't shown up in a while, but this is an incredibly valuable resource to be able to come here and just feed off the energy of other game developers and like-minded people. From that, we found events to go demo and play test at. And then 2020, we did early access. 2024 was the full release. So speaking of some people who have known us for a while, I think the next few slides are kind of more for some of you guys to just see the progression of the game.
So we've been to a handful of great events. We've been to Gamers Rhapsody, 2D Con, Combo Breaker, Evo. We were at MDev and MagFest too. So here's just some evidence that we have been out there. We have been doing this for a while. And throughout that whole process, a lot can change in 10 years. So this next slide is a preview of our original version of the game, which had two-dimensional hand-drawn art that I did in Photoshop. And the bottom row here is the current generation. They are now 3D modeled, and I'm animating them inside of Blender. And just to give you a quick rundown for later, the character names starting from the left, it starts with Light Gunner, Blue Gunner, Red Gunner, Green Gunner, and Violet Gunner. A little tough to remember, but bear with us. And this is a side-by-side of the original two-dimensional version of the game and what it currently is today. And hopefully the people in the back can notice the increased resolution on almost everything in the game. The waves have a lot more texture and detail. There's mountains in the background. Enemies are 3D animated. And if this were animated, I think you would notice a lot more of those details. And up on the top, we have the HUD, completely redesigned, and we did a lot of reiterating in this game, and I think we're going to touch on much more of that later.
Yeah, one thing I always think is funny about this, when I started programming the game, I was working on a MacBook, and that has 1610 resolution, which I don't think any games ever release in. So you can see the one on the left is a little more squished. So think about the resolutions that you're designing your games in, because that's hard to fix.
This is a breakdown of our character select screen. And in the top left is the oldest version of the game. That one was actually created by my brother, the programmer. This is the programmer menu.
Yep.
Except for the artwork. I did the artwork inside of there. And as we move along through time, my big inspiration for this next version of Character Select was I wanted to highlight the personality of each character and kind of give them a little personality inside of Character Select. So just like Mario Kart, when you select them, they kind of turn towards the camera and go, wahoo! And over time, I reiterated on this, and they have more complicated animations in the bottom left version. And the difference between the bottom left and the bottom right is that we added backgrounds to the Character Select screen. So one important thing to me in this game was that each character had their own planet that they were from. So the yellow guy is from Light World, and so on. They all have their own home planet. This right here is our Astral gunship. So we're going planet to planet, and the connective tissue between that was a ship that carries you from planet to planet. And I went through my old sketchbooks, and I found my very first sketch of this version of the gunship. And originally, it belonged to Light Gunner, so it was colored yellow and white. And as I got better at Blender, a lot more details got added, and I continued getting better, and we decided together that it would be best for the game to have a whole new character called Data Gunner, who would talk to the player at the start of each level and kind of set up what they're getting into.
Excuse me. And there were some gameplay elements that weren't in the game from the very beginning that we added over time that really brought things together. One big thing right here is you can see light gunners holding out a shield, blocking the bullets. This was one of the things that we added where a lot of people who weren't familiar with shoot 'em ups really resonated with this. They were just like, oh, I can do something other than just move out of the way. I can press a button and deal with the bullets. And a lot of veteran shmup players really seemed to like that they could play even riskier and get closer to enemies and get higher scores with stuff like that. So it was fun discovering stuff like that along the way. One other thing that we stumbled into was a ally support system. On the left, you'll see that there's the orange worker who shows up in a level, and Erick, I think, originally designed this. He just wanted a friendly guy to show up and say, hey, how's it going, buddy? And over time, I kept seeing that. I was like, we should do something with this. It's almost like a Chekhov's gun. Like, you put something in there, and you need to do something with that. So we added the assist part where all the allies give you little mini quests that you can complete, and if you successfully save them or complete their quests, they can help you out in the next level. The game has a way where you can pick the order you play the levels in, and this was something that gave that final layer of strategy to that I think brought the game together. And then one last thing we added a little bit later into development, system overload. It's something that was a big goal with this game was to make a point that playing for score is for fun. I think a lot of people don't realize how much fun it can be to play a game for score. So with that, we studied casino slot machines and realized if you just make things bright, flashy, throw medallions at the player, it gets exciting. So you can kind of accidentally figure out how to score well in this game, and we've gotten a lot of messages from people saying, like, I've never played a shmup for score before, but it clicked with me in this game. So that's really fun to hear those kinds of comments. So next portion of this presentation, we're going to talk a little bit about our experience with early access. I know I was talking to someone earlier saying they were kind of interested in this. This is something where, why did we do early access? Honestly, we didn't know what we were doing, and we thought feedback would be helpful. It wasn't something that we set out to do from the beginning. We weren't making this game and thinking like, oh, let's do an early access. This is going to be an early access game. After going through the process, I think it's something that you have to really think hard about doing. It's not something that you should just kind of decide on a whim to do. But it was also life circumstances kind of pushed us in this direction. We were working on the game full time around the time the pandemic hit, and we just thought it was way too risky to keep working on a game full time. Didn't know it was going to happen, so put it out on early access just to see what the actual market reaction to it was. I would say sales were artistically satisfying, but not enough to live off of. That's probably the best way to word it. I think you wanted to.
Yeah, so how does it feel to release an early access game? For me, it was a little difficult because I think we all know the crunch, where you have a deadline and you work your butt off to try to get everything done in time. And it was really satisfying to make something that we were proud of, but the trouble with early access was that we weren't done. We had to keep working even though we had gone through that crunch. And that didn't affect my brother as much as it affected me, because I feel like I'm creatively driven. So if I watch, the first Star Wars, A New Hope, after that movie, I'm like, I want to make something that gives other people the same feeling that I get when I watch a great movie. And, the reality of that burnout was something I didn't anticipate.
Another thing is you are put into a marketing mindset while you're working on the game. And I think the thing I've been telling most people I've talked to about this is if you have a marketer on your staff, early access can actually be a good thing because then they have something to do full time and it's not all just condensed into one moment. But if you're trying to develop a game and work on marketing, it's like even just making a social media post every once in a while is not something you want to do when you're like in the middle of development. So I would say the most important factor to successful early access is having a marketing guy on board. But yeah, what are the risks of early access? Everything. Like I said earlier, the interest is spread out over a longer period of time. And one thing that we've observed with a lot of games is if you can condense that window of interest to a smaller time frame, you can make one important call to action. That helps a lot with just getting people on board. Like if you put out a trailer saying there's an early access release, then people might hold off and wait longer, and then you put out a trailer saying buy the game now, they might have already lost interest in it. And a lot of people kind of give off the I'll wait till it's finished to buy it response, which I think is respectable. Like I do the same thing with a lot of early access games. So I'm basically just cautioning against early access if it's something that anyone's thinking of doing. It's a very, very tough thing to do right. So other things that I would recommend or that we would recommend instead of that, limit your scope a bit. I think we could have released a full game when we went into early access and the perception would have been a little bit better. All we really would have had to do was make a lesser product in our mind. Keeping the scope flexible is another thing. We wanted to have a level for each character, so when we were ready to be done with it and move on and release it, we didn't have a level for each character, so that really rigid scope prevented us from releasing it. So I think on our next projects, developing a game like a sandwich seems like the smart thing to do. Make the first level, make the last level, and then fill all the meat and veggies, or make a whole meat sandwich or all veggie sandwich, whatever you want to do with your game. And this is advice that gets thrown around a lot, and it's what Miyamoto said once a while ago regarding Zelda. A delayed game is eventually good, but a rushed game is forever bad. This advice isn't for indie devs. You're not a multi-million-dollar company with millions of fans. There's only so much time in the day, and you don't really have the resources to make a profitable game and keep kind of taking your time with stuff. I think in smaller teams, being able to learn how to prioritize what tasks are important is one of the best approaches to take. I just wanted to poke fun at Miyamoto. I think he's a great game developer, but yeah.
Had fun making that image.
All right, so this next section of the presentation, we just kind of have a random mess of lessons we've learned from the process of making a game. Before we go into this, does anyone have any questions on what we've been talking about?
In charge of marketing? Oh, sorry. You mentioned marketing. Was someone in charge of marketing?
We did have someone that we worked with a little bit as a marketing consultant, but there wasn't like a marketing person on the team, and it was really just like someone who was a friend kind of giving advice on stuff. That's more of the, like, we both tried to do some of the marketing ourselves, and it's, a lot of people aren't built for it. So it was really helpful having a friend to talk to about marketing advice and stuff, but I think having a dedicated marketing person on a team is, like, I look at a lot of games recently that have done well, and they always seem to have, if you look at the credits, there's someone credited for marketing. So it's just an observation, I think, that, especially from experience and trying to like keep interest in the game going, it's hard to do while developing. Is that sort of good?
So on the same topic, if you were to go looking for someone who is not currently part of your team, and what skills would you look for in a marketer?
I think anyone who's able to keep up with like social media trends, how to get stuff recognized, someone who can have a good eye for trailers, being able to say what makes things important in a trailers. Honestly, it's something that I don't think I'm fully qualified to say what would make someone a good marketer. I just know we didn't have it, and it's something that I think you can get away without having a marketing person on your team, but I would not recommend doing early access without that because, like, I think Dead Cells is one of the most recent examples of a really successful early access game, other than like Vampire Survivors is another one. But the Dead Cells team has a lot of interviews with their marketing person who gave a lot of great insight on what they did. So I'd recommend reading from what that team said. Yeah, that I think that was a big thing, just having someone being able to talk about that and say how important that stuff is. But I think the animated trailer they had came a little bit after so like the early access did well, and then they made enough money to do that. So like that, and that's the kind of thing that I think a marketing person has the eye for, is having those plans for what comes next, where you're developing the game, you're not thinking about that all the time. So next sections, feel free to raise your hand and stop us because we're going to jump around between a number of subjects. So if you have questions, if you disagree with some of our takeaways, whatever, I don't mind arguing. But we're just going to kind of go over some of the things that we've learned. One of the first things, good enough is actually good enough. I think we got locked into trying to make our perfect dream game as our first game, and that's a really bad time. Your first game's the worst time to try and do that, because you're probably, hopefully, going to make more games after that. But another thing is keeping the scope of your team in mind. I think a lot of people, especially going back to marketers a bit, there's a lot of games that are being marketed as indie games that you look at them and think like, oh, that's maybe a team of 2 to 10 people, but it's actually 50 to 100 people. So if you're comparing your game to like Fall Guys or Disco Elysium or stuff like that, which are great games, but those had pretty big teams working on them, even if they're presented as indie. Just keep the scope of your game in mind. I wouldn't recommend comparing to other people, but if you are going to do so, make sure it's with teams of comparable sizes. Another thing to just remember is like the enjoyment of indie games is the rough around the edges part of them. We're basically the punk rockers of the video game industry, and a lot of people like punk music because it's rough around the edges. I think embrace that is a really important thing to keep in mind.
And one thing I learned through this process of early access was how helpful timelines can be to help you really lock down what can actually be done in that amount of time. One example is I went back and I updated our player sprites to have pupils, and just updating like those 8 pixels around the eyes took, like, I hate to admit it, it took like a month or 2 to just like go back and re-export and make sure everything was lined up correctly. And to be honest, it was good enough without the pupils. If they had their detailed portraits with pupils, I think that would have sold the same effect. So knowing where good enough is important, and deadlines can help point that out.
And another really important thing, going back to, hopefully you want to make another project after your first game. I know we're going to. You can save some of your ideas for the next project. I think this is something that when you're in the heat of the moment, you kind of forget about. You're going to improve your skills. Not everything needs to be scrapped and changed because of that. And one thing I really like telling people, if you're not embarrassed by your older works, all that means is that your skills have stagnated. If you're getting better at your craft and you look at your old stuff, I know I do, I still do a lot of music, and I look back at some of the songs I wrote in high school and read the lyrics, and they're incredibly embarrassing, but I'd like to think that's just because I've gotten better at the process of writing music. Iteration is really important, but only to a point. You can keep improving things where you start seeing diminishing returns. Trying to understand when to stop being a perfectionist is a really important thing. Because like we said earlier, there's a charm to the imperfection. It's really hard to see when you are the artist, though.
And throughout this whole process of bringing our game to events, we introduce people to Astral Gunners, but they may be remembering the older versions of the game, and it's important to remember that you only get one first impression. and you want to make it a good first impression.
Yeah, and I think spreading out a game over a long period of time can negatively impact that. End of the day, don't let perfect be the enemy of good.
And you really have to do what's best for the project. And for example, like those pupils I went back and updated, I think my brother even told me, like, hey, don't do that. That's going to be a lot of work. But I thought that, you know, I thought it was best for the project. But in hindsight, I realized it's something I should have skipped.
I mostly just didn't want to replace all the sprites. That's it.
Yeah, not everything you make will be in the final release. There's quite a large graveyard of those two-dimensional drawings that just never went anywhere. And if we had released that original 2D version of Astral Gunners, who knows what the next game may have been.
I think actually, yeah, even just preparing for this presentation and thinking about what we wanted to talk about, we booted up some of the older demos that we had of the game, and it was surprising looking at them in hindsight and being like, this was actually pretty fun. Things that at the time that we thought were inexcusable and had to be fixed, I'm looking back and just like, yeah, it's kind of cool.
And I think everyone says this, but it is paramount. Communication is key. If there's a disagreement, you know, it's important to not disagree over and over and over again for months. So in our game, Sami kind of took the gameplay lead. So if I thought that a character was too strong or too good at scoring and we disagreed about it, Sami had the final say. And I think that helped solve a lot of disputes.
Yeah, and conversely, Erick had the final say on any art decisions. This was something that we found worked really well for us, is like anything gameplay related, we would argue about and we'd have open arguments about and decide based on that. I would have final say. Any art stuff, I would give my feedback to my brother, and if he disagreed with me and we couldn't come to a resolution, he has the final say. It's an easy way to just kind of move on past stuff and not get bogged down with trying to make a game exactly fit one person's vision. Because I think a lot of small teams fall apart because of disagreements.
And it's really important to stay organized, because I think when we first started this project, we thought it would just be a quick one-year project, and we were surprised at just how long we were working on things. And you always go back to your older files. And one of my favorite examples is I named one of the background images, I named my naming conventions don't matter. And I thought that was like a funny joke, but I've run into that file at least a dozen times, and I'm reminded how important it is to take it seriously the whole way through, and staying organized, you know, naming everything so you can come back to it later. Very important. You don't want to just fish through all your garbage. And speaking of staying organized, I was really energized to just get into Game Maker and start making assets. But as I've gone through this process, I think you can make an entire game on paper, plan it out, play it in your head, and then work towards making that real. I think we wasted a lot of time just trying to jump in and making it playable before realizing our final vision of where it will end.
I think a little bit of a caveat on that. I think when you're first starting out on making games, I think it is good to just get into the whatever applications you're using and messing around. This is something I think after we have more confidence as developers now, it's way easier to just kind of make something on paper and kind of visualize how it's going to play out. But this is definitely something worth working towards.
And here's a sketch from my notebook about one of our final bosses. So in the top left, you can see Dark Gunner from the first level. And I made that arm in Blender initially. I was just kind of moving random vertices around and seeing what kind of worked. And that took a lot longer than I care to admit. And for these next versions, so he kind of transforms and gets more menacing throughout the game. For these next versions, I went with a different approach, and it really streamlined things. And I don't think I'm really saying anything new, but if you can plan what you're going to try to model, it just makes the whole process a lot easier. So I thought it was fun to kind of share some of these drawings and what they ended up being in the final game.
And this is something that, I mean, if you're here, you know we have tools for this available. We'll plug, what was Mark's playtest thing again? Twin Cities playtest. Playtest, playtest, and playtest again. That's a really important thing to do. Bring it to events. It's a 2-for-1. You get marketing and free playtesting. Consult as wide a variety of people as possible. You can get so much feedback that you wouldn't get just by yourself. A lot of people will play the game in a much different way than you would, and that's big for fixing bugs. If you're working on making a game, it's really easy to just play it the way that you would expect to play it. It's not until other people pick it up and start trying to move through walls and do things to find all of the cheesy elements in your game that you start to see a little bit of the cracks in your design. But also try and find the target audience. This is kind of counterintuitive to one of the earlier points, but the feedback you should really be focusing on are the people who are most likely to buy your game, probably. They're going to give the most valuable feedback. But ultimately, play your own game. It's something I think I see a lot of games get released on Steam where I think the developers never went and played their own game. If you're not having fun playing your own game, then there's probably something missing from it. Yeah, I think learning how to receive criticism is another really important thing. This isn't just game dev focused, but I think just every creative artist person will probably struggle with this, and I think we're still learning how to work on this, but I think when you're making art, being able to separate yourself from the art is a really important thing to do. 99% of the time, if people are critiquing your art, they're not usually trying to be mean. You can kind of tell who the trolls are, but most of the time people want to like your thing, and they're saying, hey, I want to like your thing, but maybe change this. It's, I think...
They're offering suggestions that they think would make it better, and so they're trying to be constructive even though it may not be what you want to hear.
And some people aren't very nice about how they word stuff, but you can still kind of, some people don't have the social skills, I guess, to word things in a constructive feedback way, but end of the day, they want to like your thing. They're telling you how they'll like it. So that's a big thing to keep in mind.
You want to do the UI?
Oh, yeah. I think in terms of feedback, anytime someone suggested accessibility or UI features, I don't think I've ever seen a time or had a suggestion like that where it felt like it wasn't worth adding. Sometimes I think trying to understand what's valid criticism, what's something that you really shouldn't pay attention to. Some people will suggest like, hey, why don't you have an entire economy system in your shoot 'em up? It's like, well, they don't really want to play a shoot 'em up if they're suggesting that. But most of the time, like someone suggested to us we should have a mode where we turn off bullet flashing, and we're just like, yeah, if that lets you play the game, why not add that?
And one story that really taught me a lot about myself and how I receive criticism was one of the very first times I showed the game to one of my buddies, buddy Joe. I would play Halo with him all day, and we had been working on the game for about 3 months. And I was so excited to finally, show my buddy the game. And I was upset that the first comment he had was suggesting that enemies should flash when you hit them, because I was expecting him to just, give me all this praise, like, wow, it's so cool that you were able to put this together. And I wanted him to fall in love with what I imagined the game could be. But he was just interacting with what was in front of him and offering constructive criticism to make it better. And I think that interaction, it didn't teach me much in the moment, but as I look back on it, I realize how those criticisms affect me.
Yeah, I think making any type of art is a really humbling experience, which is why all of this is worth it. Knowing your audience. Well, first off, anyone have any questions, want us to elaborate on any previous points? All right, well, oh?
All right, microphone's here. All right, well, you had mentioned communication, and I also agree it's very important. Sometimes it's difficult. I was just wondering, did you use any tools like issue trackers or anything like that to put ideas into lists and categorize them or anything, or was it all just sort of like, I know that like me and my best friend, when we work on shit, it's always just in our heads and we like somehow communicate that way. I mean, you guys probably have a close being brothers.
It
and
was
everything.
brain vomit through
Yeah, yeah.
Discord and just in-person
All right, so
communication.
no-
Yeah, we didn't.
no-
I've tried. I don't know. I think we've tried using some communication tools, and it's like they're always nice and fully featured, but I can never stick to using
Yeah, they
them.
get in the way. I don't know what. Yeah, I was just wondering if you'd found one. I just want one that's good.
It's tough.
I'm tired of Jira at work. It's awful.
Excel, Discord, yeah, that's pretty much.
Originally, we were using Facebook Messenger, but good thing we don't do that anymore.
Oh yeah, that was the thing people used.
And thank you to Trent for running that microphone, crushing it.
All right, so
One more question. When you're working alone on a small project, it's really lonely. So
Yes.
you mentioned talking to your audience members, doing some play tests. You mentioned the IGDA early on. Did you have any other like support systems for either art or programming, or was this self-directed and each decision was just you?
yeah, it was mostly just self-directed. I think I don't know if I could personally ever do a one-man project on something. Having just me and my brother at least as a support system works, because some days I'm not feeling like working on it, but my brother will come over and just be like, "Hey, let's get this next level done," or something like that, and vice versa. I think the team itself is probably a really important support system in itself. I have a few other game dev friends that I'll talk to on Discord, but yeah, like showing up here, good place for that. Going to events kind of feels like relating to some of the music stuff I've done. It's always easy to practice before you have a show because you've got something to look forward to. So I think that helps a lot with motivation, just doing those conventions, events, and showing your game off there. So. Yeah, so next thing we want to talk about, knowing your audience is important. Actually, I think this one was one you want to talk about.
I think you start and I'll end this one.
Yeah, we originally tried to avoid some of the shmup visual tropes. Most of them either have spaceships or anime girls as your playable characters. We wanted to do something different than that. But something we've learned is if you don't look like a duck, people don't think you're a duck. Is that the saying? No, it's not. But looking like what people expect your game to be like is an important thing. I think that's something that might have helped Astral Gunners out a lot more over time, is just trying to lean a little bit more into being a shmup. We were really focused on not looking like a shmup. We wanted to be original and unique.
Well, that was actually one of my main pushbacks, is I didn't want spaceships and I didn't want the usual shmup archetypes, but I think the audience that would love our game is looking for those signals. They're looking for the spaceships that indicate a very serious game. And when you look at Astral Gunners, it looks like a cartoon, which kind of gives people the opposite expectation. And I wonder if that choice to try to appeal to everyone, in fact, backfired and alienated our target demographic.
I think a big thing too is like there's like what 100+ games released a day on Steam, and most people are only ever going to see your one key art image, and if that doesn't look like a farming sim and someone wants to play a farming sim, they're going to skip over it. It's a really weird era for game development where I think being a bit more on the nose is maybe a smarter thing to do. Artistically, I think it's kind of boring, but you know, there's a balance, I guess. But yeah, we ran into a lot of scenarios where people would show up and they loved the colorful art and said, "Oh, I don't like shmups. They're scary. I'm gonna die a lot in this game." And conversely, we had people who liked bullet hells and shmups a lot and said they were surprised the game was actually good. So interesting seeing people's first impressions and perceptions playing out.
kind of related to our last slide or last comments, it's impossible to make a game that appeals to everyone. And sometimes by trying to reach that wider audience, we've lost our core audience in the process.
Yeah, so it's really tough. Yeah, I think this is something that especially when people start out making games, they want to make the perfect version of a game. They want to make the game that will work for everyone. And I know I had a lot of ambition starting on this project of kind of trying to prove that, like, oh yeah, shmups can be a popular genre. There's a reason why it's niche. The other thing we ran into is every single feature that we added kind of led to just more bloat to the game, more things to keep track of, trying to fix, running into bugs and all of that stuff. But one thing that really kind of helped keep us focused, especially towards the end, is trying to think of player archetypes. What types of people are going to be playing your game? So one thing I think about a lot is experience trying to DM for Dungeons and Dragons. I'm guessing a few people here have played that. Yeah. I think that's probably the most useful game development tool around, and if I ever taught a class on game development, I'd just start by running a D&D campaign and having other people do that. Just because you can get a feel for, like when I would play, I had a buddy Curtis who really liked narrative and storytelling, and if the story wasn't interesting, he'd get bored, pull out his phone, and not want to play. I had a buddy Christian who really liked combat mechanics, and if a fight wasn't mechanically interesting, he'd pull out his phone, get bored, and not want to play. Trying to find that balance and seeing reactions real time really helps with trying to make your game enjoyable to more than just yourself, which at the end of the day, if you're making a game, you want other people to play it. The goal should be fun for as many people as possible. I think, let's see here. Yeah. The other thing is, as an indie dev, there are also just certain demographics that are out of reach. It's really hard to make a AAA Grand Theft Auto style game where you have a giant open world. Those are just players that you're probably not going to get interested in your game, and I think that's fine. Just focus on the people who are interested in the types of games that you're making. Kind of even going off of that, more features, more problems. It's really easy to underestimate the risk of just adding in a little tiny feature. We added in something called system hacks, which are like cheat codes for the players. It's like the action replay or the Game Shark mode. It was fun, it was easy to add in, but then we kept finding there were a lot more bugs because I think we had thousands of more permutations of potential ways to play the game. So we haven't actually bug tested all of those possible variations of the game. And I think that's something that just being a game programmer, you got to get used to. You're going to be in constant anxiety that someone somewhere is going to have a crash. This was something that we noticed just analyzing sales and paying attention to where the sales were coming from. Your store landing page is way more important than you think. This is not something that I think should be taken as a half measure. When we launched into early access, our store page was a lot weaker than this. We didn't have flashy gifts. We didn't have the awards we had won. We didn't have big descriptions of the gameplay. After updating all of this stuff and entering full release, we got most of our wish lists on the game, like a couple thousand just from being on the new releases. And most of the sales that we've seen for the game have been just from Steam's algorithmic discovery. So you can see in the back end if people find it from an external website or if they find it from within Steam, where within Steam they find it. This has been the way most people have found the game. I think it makes sense. They're in a store, even if it's a digital store, they're in a shopping mood. Don't sleep on making your store page look nice.
And I like to bring up one metaphor is when I was buying games in like early 2000s, all I could do was look at the back of the box and see like, am I gonna like Chibi Robo? I don't know, let's find out. And this is kind of the equivalent of that. If it's not in the trailer, if it's not on the store page, people can't see, the levels at the end of the game, and you just always have to keep it realistic that this is what people interact with.
So another thing that I really learned the hard way from working on a game, competitive play was a big focus for me. It's a way I've always interacted with games. I'm a very competitive person. Whenever I get competitive at a game, I'm always annoyed that certain features aren't in the games. And a lot of the times, communities will come together to make those features exist. But the reality is the first thing a competitive player thinks of is how many people are playing the game. That's what makes people be competitive. They want a pool of competition to play against. There's not really a point in being the best at an obscure fighting game from the 80s that no one knows how to play. So it's not entirely worth putting in all of these features for competitive players when you should be focusing on getting more players playing your game. One thing we did add that wasn't that hard was like a training mode, so you can practice certain sections on repeat. And really this point clicked with me when we were thinking about adding a replay mode right before release. It would have been probably another 3 or 6 months of development time, and we just came to the conclusion, if people play it really competitively, we'll add it back in, but it's not worth spending that extra half a year just on a hope that it becomes a really competitively viable game. So, and like I said earlier, people will find a way to make your game competitive if they like it enough. Look at speed running. People play Mario 64 competitively, which is a game that was never designed for that. Smash Bros. Wasn't made competitive, but it's probably the biggest fighting game. And that was just made to be a fun party game. So that's pretty much everything we wanted to go over. What's next for us? We're going to rest. We're going to do some market research, which is just playing games.
And we can finally play games guilt-free. I always felt like I couldn't fully enjoy a game because I had to work on my project, and hopefully now that guilt is gone, but I have a feeling it won't go away forever. Are there any more questions?
Which level do you guys spend the most time on? There's always one level that has like either you went back to fix multiple times. Which one was it?
I think this actually lines up with the early access stuff. We both just said Dystopia is the one that took us the longest. That was the one that we had 2 levels we needed to add before switching from early access to full release. There was the final level, and then there's just one normal level called Dystopia. That one probably took us 2 or 3 years, and it wasn't that it took so long for us to work on it. It was just motivation was sapped. We had a lot of other life things taking over our time at the time.
And for me, it was that burnout. We had just done early access, and I had to jump back in and try to make a new level. And for me, I just could not get the train out of the station. I remember there was a lot of art I made, didn't like, and then redid it. And our plan for the level wasn't very concrete. We probably could have planned it out on paper before jumping into it, because there was a lot of complex movement where the player moves vertically at a certain point, and that took a while to figure out just mechanically.
Yeah, the other one was like the first level. I think we spent the most in-game development time on because it's the place to test out a lot of like player mechanics and stuff and make sure. It was also the one that we got to see play tested the most, so we got to fix a lot of things. Yeah.
So, first off, congrats, guys.
Thanks.
Seriously.
Thank you. It's nice seeing you here.
Yeah. I was there in the early days.
You were, I mean, Ari as well. We
Yeah.
looked up to both of you and the teams that you guys were working on.
Oh, you're so sweet.
You guys were like our big brothers.
Oh man, you're still there, buddy. Okay, so my question is, 10 years is a long time. So how did it feel, like the game you imagined versus everything that had come out in 10 years, and how did you feel like it landed at the end in terms of like relevance in the genre that you guys were going towards? Like, how did you feel about the what you were trying to say, you know, I guess artistically?
I think so. Like just the process of the game taking that long to make. I think when we were starting to make it, if we would have released what we had at the time that we thought of making a game, it would have been probably
ahead of its time.
Yeah.
If we could bend time.
But the way it landed, I think, I think everyone who starts making a game kind of thinks like, oh, this could be really big. But over time, as we worked on it and kind of saw the reality of, my mindset now is much more about like focusing on a niche and trying to find a way to make games within the reasonable time frame to kind of make that process work. I think it's not really worth trying to play the lottery and put all your eggs in one basket and make that big hit game. Even then from the start, like we were making a shmup, I don't think we ever fully thought that, but there's always like the back of your mind thinking like, oh, this could pop off.
Maybe.
I think it's landed pretty decently. There's like I'll still see people in like all the shmup discords talking about it and stuff. And I think we haven't seen the full potential of the game play out yet because there's some people still like I've gotten a few messages from people saying like, oh, how do I maximize score in this place? I was like, I'm the dev. I don't want to tell you. That's like cheating. So like there's some people I think are working on their perfect runs that they want to share online. So one thing that I think is challenging about making a shmup is it's a genre where you're also competing against the entire history of every game released. Like if you're following trends and releasing like a Vampire Survivors type game, you're competing against maybe only like 200 or 300 games total. But shmups really kind of have staying power. A lot of the ones from the arcade days are still fun. So I think we'll see some legs on this game. It's just getting it out there was the important thing.
Yeah, and in the end of the whole process, I'm extremely proud of the game we've created, and I just think that the world hasn't fully realized our genius yet.
Okay.
Still waiting.
Yeah, making a game is a humbling experience, right, Eric?
Very humbling.
Any other questions?
Does it make it easier or harder that you're brothers?
I think it's a lot easier because there's no like I'm not paying a contract or anything. There's no financial. We're both invested in making something that we think is fun, and it's not a job necessarily for either of us.
Yeah, I think it makes it. I don't know if it makes it easier or harder because I think me and my brother have always just gotten along. We played games together. I think it does. One thing most of the like creative groups that I've stuck with are ones where we can just kind of talk crap to each other and just say what's on our mind and no one has their feelings hurt, and that's easy to do with your brother, probably more than like working on a new team with people you don't know that well. So I think, yeah, the communication part is a lot easier.
So with your focus on development efficiency for your next project, how do you plan to implement that kind of strategy?
So I know we were talking about this actually on the drive up here. It's just planning out on paper like the minimum requirements and some wish list ideas, anything like that. The core of it is kind of that one thing that we mentioned earlier in the slide is making it kind of like a sandwich. Make the start of the game, make the end of the game. Everything else in between is a lot more flexible. I think there's an instinct to make things chronologically when you're making creative projects, and from an artistic creative perspective, I think that's the best way to do things. But if you're trying, I think our creative challenge on the next game is looking at it from more of a business mindset of how do we make money from making a game as opposed to how do we make the game that we really want to see exist in the world. But yeah.
And then as a follow-up to that, do you plan to incorporate more task management strategy as part of your development process? For example, incorporating something akin to a Trello or Asana? Not necessarily those specific things, but the idea of it.
Probably not. Most of it's probably on, like, we both like writing things physically on paper. Because that is, I think, going back, because, yeah, we were talking about communication a little bit earlier. That was something I think Ryan brought up earlier. Being able to talk to just one other person, I think does limit the need for some of that stuff, but I think it all comes down to preference. I know some people really love using those tools, but they drive me crazy.
I think those tools would really help larger teams, but maybe not for our workflow.
I thought you were just about to say like, oh, I love those tools, and I was like, oh, crap. Yeah. But yeah, I think we don't have like the roadmap fully planned out, but getting a roadmap planned out is probably the most important thing, rather than flailing around wildly like we did for Astral Gunners.
Yeah, and building the flexibility into the plan. So like if we have extra time, we can add in this bonus feature, that type of planning.
Yeah.
Any more questions?
I've got a question or two. I'd be curious to hear more about like the paper prototyping that you did for the like game that you, like for the paper making the game and playing it out in your head, what that process was like, and like what areas you focused on most or it was most helpful for.
For me, it was most helpful when it came to 3D modeling. But unfortunately, my love of the paper plan came in kind of near the end of the project, so there's not much good evidence that I've done any of that. But especially for 3D modeling, knowing the proportions, knowing what you're trying to go for, really helped a lot. In the initial draft of the Gunners, I was just kind of trying to come up with new boots, and like that's a little difficult when you're just jumping in and not really sure where you end up.
We actually had a few more slides of this subject. We thought it would be boring, but there's already 2 questions about it. The main thing that I used for like planning on paper was balancing characters, trying to write down all the number of the damages and the score potential, and kind of doing the math of the potential possibilities of what each character's maximum score potential is to make sure that it's balanced. I think that paid off because some of the feedback that we've gotten about the game is that every character feels viable, so that's something that's really great to hear play out. So yeah.
Word. And then I guess just like as an unrelated follow-up question, you had mentioned that you had like a marketing person that like a friend that you talked with about that for advice, consultancy, whatnot. I'm curious if there were any other like people that you had basically, because like the core team is the 2 of you. I'm curious if there were any other like consultants or friends who came in and like filled gaps or pointed you in the right direction along the way.
We had one of my friends helped make 2 of the trailers, and then our most recent trailer, Erick ended up working on, because we just kind of, for that one, we had a very specific vision for it. So there was a bit of help for the trailers, and then a few of our friends helped do way more dedicated play testing, all of which are credited in the game. And then also for the soundtrack, I asked as many people as I could to do guest guitar solos, which one of them's right here. Shout out to Rob.
Woo! Woo!
He's got a really cool guest solo in there. I think we had like 10 total guest solos, somewhere in that range. So it really helped make the soundtrack feel more alive because there's a lot of guitar shredding, and I only know so many tricks on guitar. So getting help on that was cool.
That's awesome.
Real quick before Josh. Sorry, Josh. Sorry. There's a, in the chat, there's a question from Avery. What part of making this game brought the most joy? Final release, initial level creation, going to cons, etc.
Tough question.
Yeah, that's a really, now I got to think. Yeah, presenting at IGDA.
The friends we made along the way.
I think the process of playtesting, so like going to events, playtesting the game, seeing people stream the game and play it, and watching people learn. I think once we got past the point where we knew what the game was and it was watching people discover it, as opposed to constantly being like, oh, if you should fix this, you should fix this, and people could just play it and kind of enjoy the game. Watching those moments play out was really rewarding. Seeing people figure out scoring tricks that were something I didn't expect people to figure out for years and stuff like that. I think watching other people play it's probably brought the most joy. You got to say one too.
Well, I just think that us being invited to present at EVO was definitely another big high point. That's a fighting game tournament we go to outside of presenting games. We just love Evo and being able to demo a booth there was really unexpected and another high point. And I'm struggling to remember, but who streamed the game? The developers of, who was it? I think in early access, sorry everyone.
I'm drawing a blank on.
Oh man, it was Japanese developers that played our game. They had made.
Oh yeah, no, Cave. It was staff from Cave who had made like Pro Gear, Dodonpachi, a lot of the classic shmups, streamed our game, and that was a really awesome thing to see. That was right around the early access release. That and being able to demo at Evo were moments where just like that's awesome to see. Just getting that recognition from kind of your like our game developer idols in a sense.
So how did you create the music? I am assuming there was some live elements because you had people do guest solos, but was it all live? Did you mix it in with MIDI? What was your process?
I spent way too much time on the soundtrack, but it was all live except for the drums, which were programmed, and I almost got a real drummer to do the drums for it and then just decided like that's probably not worth it, but I got it professionally mixed by Sean Gollier, who also did all of the mixing for my band Oak Pantheon, and then Adam Tucker of Signature Tone mastered it. So I went through the process I've done for like studio releases for my band just for the soundtrack for this game. I don't think I'll do that on the next project. I think I'll probably do something more electronic, but wanted it to sound like real heavy metal.
And one thing that might not be obvious is that each of the songs is synchronized to the levels because they're on a rail, certain moments hit at certain times, and that all lines up with the music. And my brother put a lot of effort to make sure that those synchronized.
Yeah, I think audio cues are important in shmups, so trying to line up the level design to the music was a really fun thing to make it feel like an interactive music video.
Nice. If you ever want to do a talk about music, that's high on my interest list.
Yeah, just let me know. I can come up with a presentation last minute. I could just ramble forever too, so you guys want to hear the music presentation now? We can go to that next. All right, music and video games. The first thing you need to know.
And thank you guys for coming. No, I'd be interested in hearing something like that at some point as well. Do we have any other questions?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, please. Let's see that again.
You just beat.
Yep, that's the game that we made.
So if there's no more questions, I want to say thanks to IGDA, and I see a hand raised here.
Okay, this is real quick, just like a general, and maybe this is for anybody that releases games, because it's one of the things I do when I look at games, and they're a few years old. But I mean, there's one is if you have any ideas, or if you're planning on DLC, which I don't think you are. And then if are you actively doing debugging and at least planning to put out the occasional update so people still see that you're like active and alive?
Yeah, we still have, I think, 3 more. Like Steam has those like update, like you can get visibility. Yeah, the visibility things. Yeah, we've got a few of those. We'll probably add in. We have a lot of ideas for DLC, but we also have to like eventually be like, all right, people need to want the game before we make new character. Like people want, like I think there are people who would like to see that, but enough people need to be able to put development time into that. Might still have like a boss rush mode or a survival mode or something that's kind of high value, low effort to add to the game.
And speaking of flexible planning, Trent, if we can go to the character select screen, there's a little blank space that has random, and that random space is our plan. If there's enough traction, we could add new characters inside of that random slot.
Yeah, I've got paper drafts for.
If you go to the
4 or 5
slideshow, it was the character select screen, which is like the 4 different versions. So I think it was like slide 10. That's the one. Yeah, so this is our flexible plan, is this blank space here. If we did get enough attention, that's where a new character would go.
I think we'd probably just rather make a new game at this point, though. That's kind of. But there's ideas, I think. We have paper drafts of like 4 or 5 characters.
Orange.
Gray, pink.
And Dark Gunner was planned to be a character at one point.
Well, yes, he's going to be Gray Gun. Or no, whoops. Spoilers. Anything else? Otherwise, I think. Oh, one more.
Have you considered like porting it to mobile, and why?
That is actually so. 10 years ago, when we were asked that question, we were just like, no, absolutely not. But now I think a lot more people have game controllers on Android and use Android devices for gaming. So it's something that's kind of like come back up in our mind. That and Switch are like the 2 things we're thinking of also putting the game on. But it's something where I think being able to get a second release is a hard thing to do. It's something that we're thinking about it, but yeah, haven't really fully weighed the pros and cons, but yeah.
Okay. If there's no more questions, then I think we'll see everyone at Perkins.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us.
Another round of applause. Yeah, thank you. Alrighty, so yeah, we'll linger around for a little longer, and then we will make our way over to Perkins. Let's get a show of hands right now. Stick them up and keep them up while I run around into the room and count if you're interested in going to Perkins. All right, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. Oh, goodness. I think 20, 21, 22. We're going to round up to 25. That feels safe. So if you are unfamiliar with where this Perkins is, it should be the closest one if you search on Google Maps. Trent is pulling it up. Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much for doing that, Mark. And for the folks on our stream, I'll run up to the camera to give you a fond farewell. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for tuning in. Good night.
And one more thing, we have some 3D printed Astral Gunners logos, so feel free to pick one up at the door. We have some buttons that we brought to events.